Startup and recovery. In this nugget, we'll be talking about startup and recovery, where we'll start off by talking about the various startup modes, usually some version of a safe mode, and we'll also talk about the emergency repair disk, which has been available for Windows 2000. We have a similar yet evolved kind of a method with the ERD in current versions of the operating system like Windows XP, where we can use automated system recovery. It's also available with Windows Server 2003. And then we have the system file checker to confirm the integrity of our files. We'll be looking at that and how it does its job. We'll also take a look at how there's a recovery CD or partition, or both, that often accompany new computers, and we can see how we can recover our systems there, as well as taking a look at the system restore utility, which is available only with Windows XP. A couple of weeks ago, I decided to play hooky from work, and I went down to the Desert Botanical Gardens here in Phoenix, which is near the Phoenix Zoo. And here in the springtime, they have a butterfly exhibit. So I got my camera gear out, went down there and shot a few photographs of some butterflies, and here's one of the shots that I've got right here. One thing that I saw about these butterflies, and I'm sure you realize this as well, is how delicate they are. I mean, they're just tiny little creatures, and the wings are so dry, and they're supposed to be that way, but they're so dry that they're very often brittle, and I saw a lot of butterflies down there with kind of jagged edges on the edge of their wings. You know, Windows is a lot like that in itself, because it can be very delicate. Everything seems to be working just fine one day, and then you make one little tiny change, or you install one little tiny application, or change a driver or something, and all of a sudden, bam, the system won't even start up anymore. Well, when that happens, now what are you going to do? Well, one of the things you can do is to go to a certain startup mode. There's several different ones to choose from, and these all started with Windows 95. The most famous of them all is probably just the normal safe mode. Now, what happens here is we will want to use safe mode if we either cannot boot normally into Windows, or when we do, something does not behave properly, or maybe every time we boot up, the system locks up or something like this. Very often, we will want to go to safe mode if we suspect that a driver has caused the problem. Let me give you an example of what this is like and what this really does. Safe mode really just loads the core operating system, and it gives you only a basic, very stable VGA default driver. You're not going to play fancy games or anything like that. In safe mode, you could probably get away with solitaire, maybe. But other than that, it really doesn't load much of anything. Why is it that it gives us such a base version of Windows? Well, that's because we want to use the process of elimination. If we can successfully boot to safe mode, then we know that there's a driver that we've installed recently or updated recently, or maybe there's an application that we've worked with recently or updated recently that has caused the problem because something outside of the core operating system is giving us a problem. Now, if we try to boot into safe mode and we still cannot successfully boot Windows, we're probably in a situation where we'll need to use one of the other recovery methods, which I'll show you here shortly, or just a reinstallation of Windows, and sometimes that's also necessary. And here you can see I've gone to a Windows XP client, and I've gotten to the menu that we use in order to be able to go into safe mode. And I'm using my arrow keys to move up here to where it says safe mode. Now, how do I get to this menu? Well, I can get there a couple of different ways. Number one, if the system detects that it was not able to successfully boot the last time I tried to boot, then it will automatically, very often, give me this menu. And then it will give me an option to choose safe mode or any of these other options there. And if I want to, if it was just a matter of, the power went out the last time it was starting up and there's not really a problem, I would just choose that option down there that says start Windows normally. Otherwise, I can use this safe mode item. And while I'm here, let me go ahead and address what some of the rest of these are, because we see a couple of other ones that we've addressed or that are required here in the A+ exam objectives. There's the one with the command prompt, and there's the one with networking. So let's address those. Now let's start with the networking since we're right there. Networking does the same exact thing as safe mode does. It doesn't load any other drivers besides a generic VGA driver, and it doesn't load anything in the startup group or anything like that, but it does load one additional item, and that is the networking. It'll load the network driver for whatever your network card is, and the TCP/IP stack and so forth. This might be useful if you're confident that you're not really having a problem with the network driver or any of that configuration, and you want to be on the network when you start the computer. That can be very useful if you need to go to the internet and download an updated video driver, maybe video is causing the problem, or whatever. So networking can still be useful for you there. Or if you need to communicate with another computer or another host on the network, when you restart into safe mode. And then safe mode with the command prompt does just that. It doesn't load a graphical user interface at all, and that will help you to determine if something in the graphical user interface is causing a problem. Because if you can successfully get to a command prompt only, then you've narrowed down that something else is causing the problem within the Windows GUI. And it could still be other things that use the Windows GUI. It could be an application in the Windows GUI. So at least you can still help to eliminate the cause of some of these types of problems. Now also, it doesn't say it right here, but all of these safe mode options will also do boot logging. I could just choose enable boot logging, and what that would do then is it would start Windows normally, but it would also take a little bit longer because it's going to be writing out to a text file, a log file, everything that it's doing while it's booting up. And if I have, for example, a driver that's failing because maybe it's corrupt or something like that, or an application or a service that will not properly start up, then it will also log what files it was trying to load at the time that I restarted this computer. And then I can go to it and see what items failed. And I can just look for, in the log file, word fail, and I can just do a search for that, because you can open that log file from within Notepad, and it stores the file in the root of your system drive. And it's just called the bootlog file. I can also enable VGA mode if I don't really need a full safe mode, because I know good and well I just upgraded my video driver, and now whenever I boot the system, I can't see anything. Maybe it's just totally blinded me to the entire interface for some reason. Well, if that's the case, then I can boot to a normal operating system, but I can choose to use just this VGA mode, and as a result, it's going to give me just a plain VGA driver, but everything else will still load. Other stuff in my startup group, other registry settings that I've configured for a specific user. I still get my networking and all of that. And then these aren't really part of the A+ exam objectives, but they're here, and so I don't want to really skip over them. One of these is the last known good configuration, and that is every time you shut down your computer or restart your computer, it creates a record of what your registry settings were and certain configuration settings. And then if I'm not able to get to a successful startup and shutdown in the future, like my very next session, for example, then maybe I just have to turn off the power because it won't let me shut down normally anymore. Then what I can do is to go back into this boot menu and choose last known good configuration. And by the way, I can't remember if I mentioned this, so let me briefly state. How do you get to this menu if it doesn't appear automatically because of a problem? Well, right after you see the post, press the F8 key on your keyboard, and all of this will come up. And then as you can see here, this option, Directory Services Restore Mode, relates only to Windows domain controllers and Active Directory. So if I were having Active Directory problems, then I could use that. And just in brief, that allows me to restore from a backup an earlier version of Active Directory or earlier version of portions of Active Directory. And then there's also this debugging mode, which is useful for purposes of checking out detailed information about the boot process. You have to connect another computer using a serial port in order to be able to do that. And then I can also disable automatic restart on system failure. This is something that sometimes happens when the system fails during the boot process, and then it gets caught in a loop. Certain things can cause it to get caught in a loop where it will endlessly try to reboot itself. We might want to avoid that, of course. Then start Windows normally, reboot, or return to the operating system choices menu, which would take us to the boot INI configured boot menu choices. Now then, another thing we can do in order to give us good recoverability is to use something called the recovery console. Now, this is generally speaking something that's going to be better for your more advanced users or for A+ technicians. This is not something that average home users will typically be able to use. Now, what this does is it takes you back to like a DOS-like kind of a view or a command line during the boot up process. And then it's not going to load any kind of a GUI at all. It's a lot like safe mode with command prompt, except that the recovery console includes additional tools that are not normally included with just a normal command prompt. Now, in order to check that out, let's go ahead and go to a command prompt here, or rather to a command console. Now, I don't really have that yet. I can get to the command console one of two ways. The first way is to boot from the CD, and then start to run setup. And in the setup process, there will be a repair option to run the command console, and then you'll just run those tools and the console itself directly from the CD-ROM. The other way would be to install it in advance. That way you don't have to have the CD-ROM on hand if you ever need it in the future. That's what I would do here. Just go to the CD with the i386 directory for the source files for your existing operating system. And this applies to Windows 2000 and Windows XP, of course. And then in the i386 directory, there's WinNT32. We saw that before. That's the installation executable that we use to start a setup. Well, here we're going to do the same thing, only we're going to also add this command console switch at the end of this, and then we'll press enter. And then by pressing enter, it's going to go ahead and launch what it needs to install the command console. And then the next thing we'll see here is a prompt to install the recovery console. It only requires 7 megabytes of hard drive space, so we'll go ahead and say yes to that, and it'll go ahead and check for any updates from Microsoft's website, which is, I guess that's what it's doing right now, with something called Dynamic Update, and then it will continue the installation. Now, one thing to be aware of is that when you install the command console like this, it will add a boot INI option. That will then give a 30-second pause to the startup process, and it will pause to see if you want to run the command console or whether we want to boot into Windows normally. Normally, I'll go into the boot INI and adjust that down because I don't want that to appear every time for 30 seconds. That's quite long. I usually change mine to about 5 seconds, sometimes 3, and then that will reduce my startup time. Now, the next thing I want to do is to kind of kill 2 or 3 or 4 birds with one stone. You see, the boot INI file is now going to be configured for a 30-second delay during the boot process. I really don't want that. So what I want to do is to go to the command line and show you some additional things you need to know for A+ purposes, and I'll just use this opportunity kind of as a teaching tool. Now, first of all, actually, let me go to the boot file here by right-clicking on it and then choosing its properties. And when I do that, I'll see a couple of things. First of all, notice that it's kind of dimmed out. That identifies it as a hidden file. This also happens to be a system file, and it's going to be a hidden file. So there's several different parameters there, or attributes to this file, that I need to change in order to be able to edit this. So there's the read-only, there's the hidden, and it also happens to be a system file. Now, I'm going to go ahead and go to a command prompt, and then from there, I'm going to go ahead and make a directory, change to that directory, and then I'm going to back up this boot INI file to that directory so that I have a place for it for safekeeping. Now then, here's where I'm going to show you some of the other things that we can do. For example, first of all, I can do the cd command. If I do a cd to change directory, followed by a ... it takes me up a directory. I can change directories back to that directory by typing the cd, and then I can give it the first couple of letters. If they're unique to any other directories in the Documents and Settings folder, I can also press tab to automatically fill in the rest of this, and it fills it in for me as trainer. And there we go. Now I've gone back to that directory. To go back to the root of the drive, I just cd space /, and now I'm at the C drive, which is where I want to be. The next thing that I want to be able to do here is to make a directory. What I want to do is to back up my existing boot INI file. It's kind of a critical file, so if I want to edit it, it might not be a bad idea to back it up. Now, there are a number of different ways of doing that. I'm going to choose the real simple way here from the command line, though. And I'm going to make a directory, and I'll call this, boot back, for lack of a better term right now, but boot back for my backup of the boot INI file. And it'll just create it off of the directory that I'm currently in. Okay, so it's going to create, if I do a dir, I'll show that I have a boot back directory. And it should be in here. So there it is, a boot back directory that I've created. Now what I want to do is to remove the attributes for that boot INI file so that I can work with it. Otherwise, it'll be like a read-only file, and I won't be able to edit it or anything like that. So then what I'm going to do is to, first of all, remove the attributes, trib, and then I'm going to remove the system, the hidden, and the read-only attribute from boot.ini. And if it doesn't error out at me, then I know that it's successfully done that. If it does give me an error, then of course there's been a problem. There's no error message there, so everything seems to have worked just fine for that particular item. Now what I want to do is to copy the boot.ini file to my /boot back directory, rather boot back directory, and we'll press enter, and it's copied that file over for me. Now I'll go ahead and edit this boot INI file. So I'll go edit, and this is another command that you can use from a command line, another A+ objective command that you need to know. And I'll type in boot.ini. Should allow me to make changes to it now because I've removed the system hidden and read-only attributes. Now, once I've typed that in, it opens up the edit command from a command line here. And it's a very simple text editor. It does a lot of the same things that something like Notepad would do. It'll do basic search functions and the like, but it doesn't have fancy stuff like grammar check or spell checking and stuff like a Microsoft Word might. Now, here's my timeout of 30 seconds. Wow, that's way too long. So I'm going to change that to 5 seconds. And then that's all I really want to do at this point. So now what I can do is use the Alt key on my keyboard because this does not use the mouse, but I use the Alt key and then F. Notice how it highlights the first letter of all of these menu items. So I'll press F on the keyboard and I'll then use my arrow key down here to save it. And then once I've done that, I can do an Alt F again, and then I can press X on the exit here, or I can arrow down and press Enter. But I'll use the X, and now I've changed that boot.ini file, and if I want to confirm that real easily here, I can just do a type boot.ini, and it will show me the contents of that boot.ini file, and it's now been successfully changed to 5 seconds. Now, if I've successfully then rebooted the computer, I see that the timeout works just fine and the options work just fine. Then if I wanted to, I could remove the directory that I'd created earlier. So if I remove directory, boot back, then we see that the directory is not empty. This is a fail-safe item that will not allow you to accidentally delete files in there. I might have thought that was empty. It might have hidden files in it or system files in it. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and, first of all, change to that directory. So I'll do a cd boot back, and then I'll delete that file. Let's do a dir to quickly verify what was in there. I'll then delete. I can use the del command for that. Boot.ini, press enter, change directories back up to the higher level again, and now I'm going to remove directory, boot back, and it has been successfully deleted, confirmed by the dir command. Now then let's also cover one more item that you'll need to know about from the command line, and that is the help command, which is going to be different than the help that you get on the start menu, where it has a graphical user interface right here, allows you to have a searchable interface and things like this. This one here will just show you the help that's available for other command line items. So for example, we just did, what did we do, the cd command. I could do help space cd, and then it shows me all of the help that's available with the cd command and the syntax and all of those other kinds of things that are available. Likewise, by the way, there's a help command that's available for the command console, and sometimes I call it the command console, sometimes the recovery console, and I only use those interchangeably because so does Microsoft. Sometimes they'll call it one or the other. They're considered to be the same thing, however. Now then let's go ahead and continue then to take a look at the recovery console and the help system with the recovery console by rebooting that machine where I installed it, and we'll see we get a 5-second countdown here to choose one. I'm going to move the arrow key just to turn off the countdown, and then I'll just go ahead and choose the Windows Recovery Console. And pressing enter then, we'll see that it's going to find an installation of Windows. I've only got one, so I'll have to press 1 and then enter. You'll see that in a moment. And then I'll have to enter in the password. This is also a security sensitive item because we wouldn't want any passerby to walk up to this computer be able to log on to the recovery console because they could, after all, delete files or modify the operating system or do some kind of security sensitive operation. And then as an example, if I try to go to one of those other directories, let's say CD, and then I'd have to go to program files, for example. Program files, maybe I was malicious and I wanted to destroy something over there. Notice that I put it in quotation marks. You have to do that if there's a space in the name. So I'll press enter here and access is denied. So once again, it's designed only to allow me to administer various Windows functions. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the help item right here then. If I press help, type help and press enter, it shows me the various things that are available. Once again, I'm going to see here things that do come available to me here that would not be available in a normal installation of Windows. One example there would be something like fix boot, fix MBR. These are very useful commands. If there's something wrong with the boot process, it can go ahead and check out my boot.ini file, make sure that it's pointing to the right system or boot directories, and then I can also use fix MBR to repair the master boot record on the operating system, or actually on the hard drive, if I'm having problems with that. So those are just two examples of a lot of the different kind of items that I can get within this, and it's very handy to get to. Now you might notice that when you get into this, you can't press Control-Delete to restart the computer. It would prevent that from happening. What you do in order to reboot is you type exit, and then having done that, it will reboot the computer for you. Now, before I move on, I do need to talk to you about one other startup mode. That's one called the step-by-step or single-step mode. And it's kind of baffling me as to why CompTIA includes it on the exam objectives. The reason for that is because it's only available in older operating systems like Windows 95. I mean, it's not even available with Windows 98. It's a pretty old way of booting the system. And I'm just going to go ahead and show it to you real quick here. I went ahead and pressed F8 as I started to boot up Windows 95, and now I choose the step-by-step confirmation. That's what it's talking about. And it asks you if you want to process individual items. The reason why we don't really do this too much anymore is because there are better ways of going through individual items for all of this. Also, current operating systems no longer normally load a config.sys or an autoexec.bat or use any of these older methods for managing memory either, such as using high mem. So these are just a whole bunch of different things that we don't really have a need for anymore, or that we have a better method for choosing whether or not we want to load them in current operating systems. Now let's go ahead and talk now about the emergency repair disk. This is another recovery utility that you can use. It's only available in current operating systems for Windows 2000, and you use the Windows 2000 version of the backup utility that's included with the product for this. And then what this does is it will back up the system and the boot partition information. It identifies where they are, what partition the system and the boot are located on, what drive they're located on, and so forth. And then it also records other volume information. What's going to happen with this is the ERD utility will create a floppy disk for me, which will help me to reconstruct the operating system in case of a failure. This is kind of one of the last-ditch effort kinds of things. If I've tried other troubleshooting methods, this is a little bit more drastic because it's almost a reinstallation. It's just one step shy of a reinstallation. So in essence, what ERD really does is it allows you to reboot or reconstruct the system and boot partitions, and it can replace bad files that might have been corrupted or accidentally deleted with known good files from the source information, from the source CD, for example, for that operating system. Then what you can also do with this is, if you, as an option you want to, you can back up the registry as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at how this works. If I want to create an emergency repair disk, I simply, on Windows 2000 only, once again, go to Start, Programs, Accessories, System Tools, and then there's the old venerable backup utility where I simply select the emergency repair disk as the option on the bottom there. And I can also back up the registry to repair that directory and click OK. And then what it's going to do is go ahead and copy all of this system data to the floppy disk, and it's also going to create for me a specific directory with backups for the registry. Now once I've done this, we get the message that the emergency repair disk was saved successfully. I click OK here. I have to have had a floppy disk in the drive. I already did have one there, so if I go to the floppy A, you can see that I've got some configuration file in here and some setup information. This identifies key files that are necessary for a proper recovery of this operating system, and that's what that's going to be there. Then let's also take a look at where the registry information is located. That's under WinNT, and then repair. Now, here's a bunch of files, and the current date is, what is this, March 24th of 2007. It looks like these files are kind of old. So what are these about? These are old registry files that were first created when I first installed Windows 2000 on this computer. So if I did not choose the option to back up the registry and I use the ERD disk later on, it will restore only these old versions of the registry files. So that's another good reason to also back up the registry when you create the ERD. Otherwise, I'll lose all my settings, my application configuration, lots of things that I'll have to go in and reconfigure later on, because this takes me back to kind of ground zero. Here's the registry backup that I created just a moment ago, and that was done when I created the ERD disk. And as a result, when I recover with the ERD disk, it's going to recover this version of the registry, which is going to keep any current applications and things that I've created, any personal preferences that I've also created as well. So then now let's go ahead and reboot this computer, except that now when I boot it up, I'm going to boot from the Windows 2000 CD-ROM. Okay, so I'm going to press Escape to go to a boot menu here. Your BIOS may be different than this, but this is the way a lot of them work. And now I've selected the CD-ROM to boot from. Once I get to that, it's going to press any key to boot from that CD, which I select. And then in a moment here, it's going to give me an option to do a repair. At that point, I'll go ahead and show you what you need to do. And here I get the prompt to go ahead and choose a repair. That's what I want to do, is that middle option right there. So I'll press R on my keyboard, and then it's going to go ahead and look for the recovery options here. I could use the recovery console. This is what I told you earlier. You can use the recovery console from the CD. This is how I would access it. In my case, I want to use the repair process, so I'll use the R on the keyboard here once again, and I have two options. I can do a manual repair or a fast repair. A fast repair just goes through and does three things at once, and I'll show you what those are. You can manually select them or deselect them using the manual repair. So I'll just press M right now, and if I had done the fast repair, it would choose all of three of these things and then just run through all of those. It'll inspect the startup environment to make sure that I've got the proper boot INI configuration, for example, verify my system files, and it can compare that against the files that are on this CD, and if any of them look like they're corrupt or missing, then it can copy them from the CD to the local hard drive, and then it will inspect the boot sector as well. And that's different than the boot INI file. The boot INI is a file that points to the operating system. The boot sector is something that is necessary for the BIOS to be able to locate so that it can get a boot started. And then what I would do is I can just select whichever one of these I want to select or deselect, and I can just press the Enter key to DX one of these things. Or in my case, I'll just go ahead and select all of them, for example. And then we would just press Enter to go ahead and continue here. So having gone down here, I'll go ahead and press Enter, and then I'll go ahead and continue. So then I've got the emergency repair disk, so I'm going to press Enter, and it asks me to identify drive A. I'm going to go ahead and press Enter here so that it can locate that disk, and the disk was already in there, so now it's going to go ahead and go through and do everything that it's supposed to do. It looks a lot like a normal installation, but when it's done, it should have repaired any system files that I had problems with, and this is very frequently going to be the case if I have an unstable system or a system that will not boot properly. This might be a good way to go to bring it back to a working state. Now then, as a replacement for the ERD that we used in Windows 2000, we now have the automated system recovery for Windows XP. This also applies, by the way, for Windows Server 2003 if you use that product. What this does is it also backs up, again, the system and the boot partition information, as well as the volume information, but it also now adds data. Not all data. There is some caveats to this you have to be aware of. It just backs up the hard drive where the system and boot partition is. Normally that's going to be drive C. Now if you have a data partition, or rather a data directory on that partition, then it's also going to back up that data. But if I have another partition or another drive, it ignores that. So you have to be careful about expecting this to back up all of your data. Only the data that's on the system and boot partition. Let's go ahead and take a look at how this works. Here I've got a Windows XP system, and I want to go ahead and create a backup of this. In particular, I want to go ahead and create an ASR backup, so I'll go to my System Tools and select Backup. And then once we get into this, it starts in a wizard mode, and I can choose that wizard mode, or I could go to advanced mode. If I use the wizard mode, which is what a lot of people do, and I'll show you both methods, then I'll just go to Next, Backup Files and Settings, Next, and then I want to back up all information on this computer. What this does, it doesn't say it here anywhere, what this does is it creates that automated system restore backup for me. And then I'll have to have also a floppy disk, just like I did for the ERD in the previous method. So I'll have to have an empty floppy disk in the drive, click on Next. Then once I do this, I'll just choose a place to save my backup. Now, this is what I'm not going to do. I don't want to save the backup on the floppy. I'm going to save like, a gigabyte and a half worth of data, because remember, I'm really backing up the entire C drive in this case. So don't select the floppy disk. I'll choose a different destination here instead. And I'm going to go to, I've got a backup drive right here. So I'll back it up here, and I'll just call this backup. I've already created one there, but I'll just call it backup right there. And then what I'll need to do is to type a name for the backup and then hit Next. And when I click Finish, it'll start to back everything up. And you can see I already created that backup because that file was already there, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel this. I already did that in advance because it does take several minutes to create that entire backup. So I'll have the backup located on my drive E that you saw right there. That includes everything that's on my C drive in this case. And then for my floppy disk, we see here we have a couple of files here that has plug-and-play information about my system, as well as, and I'll just go ahead and open this up for you in Notepad by double-clicking on it and selecting a program here. And then once we open this up, we'll see that it gives me information about my disk signatures and which disk, my master boot record disk, my partitions, all of those, all the volumes that I have here. And it needs to be able to reconstruct this if it's going to bring back my system. Now again, ERD as well as ASR are primarily used for giving CPR to your system. I mean, it's just about dead. It won't boot properly, having serious problems, but I don't want to do a full reinstallation because I don't want to reinstall all my applications and all of that and reset all of my preferences. This is the best thing you can do prior to having to just throw your hands up in the air and saying, heck, I give up. I don't know what else to do. I'm going to format C:, and just reinstall everything. So this is a really good solution if you're at that stage. And then when we come to restoring the automated system recovery, what we'll do with this is we have to make sure that our automated system recovery backup is available. In my case, it was a file on a local hard drive, so it's available to me. And then I would insert the floppy disk that this will have created, which we just looked at a moment ago. And then we'll boot from the Windows XP CD. And then once we do that, we'll choose F2. There will be an F2 option during the startup process from that CD. And then what we'll do is, once we have launched this ASR, it'll reconfigure the drives. I do have to have drives of at least the same size. Maybe I've had to replace the drives as well, in addition to all my other troubleshooting methods. Then I have to make sure the drives are at least as large as the drives that were in there when I made this backup. Then it will copy the files as necessary, and then it will restore any backup data that I have in my backup file. And also, as you can probably guess from looking at all the things you have to do here, this is anything but automated. So I don't know why they call it automated system recovery, but they do. Also, sometimes we'll just call this automated system restore instead of automated system recovery. That's just a colloquial difference. The official name for it, if you need to know that though, is automated system recovery. Now then here I'm just going to go ahead and start this machine after I've created my ASR backup. And having started the machine, I'll press escape to go ahead and go into a boot menu where once again, I'll boot from the CD-ROM drive just to confirm that I can do that. And then I'll press any key to boot from it. And then once it gets to the appropriate screen, I'll show you what you need to do next. And then what happens here is we'll see it says press F2 to load to run ASR. I pressed F2 just now. It's kind of hard to see, by the way, but it does appear down here at the bottom, and it only appears, man, must be 2 or 3 seconds. So you really have to be looking right at it, or else you're going to miss it. And by the way, just in case you're wondering, I already missed it 3 times. I just had to stop recording and start over again because I must have gotten distracted and kept looking away. But you just have to keep looking there to see if you can find that F2 message. Anyway, now we've got this thing going, and it's going to give us an ASR recovery. And that's what it's doing right here, by the way. It located the appropriate disk and partition, and it's reformatting that partition so that it can set it back to the way that it appears on the floppy disk that I have where I've recorded using ASR the characteristics of that disk and partition. And then after this, all it does is it copies all the files it from the CD as necessary, and then it will restore all the files from my ASR backup. You also want to make sure that you only create that ASR backup when everything is in tip-top shape. Don't create that ASR backup if it's looking kind of shaky or questionable already, because you might just be duplicating the problem. What this should do, however, if I have a known good backup, then it's going to, again, restore all the system files and all the files on that ASR backup, pretty much going to restore me to the way that I was at the time of that ASR backup. Now, that might be kind of drastic, all that stuff I just showed you about ERD and ASR, because you could pretty much reinstalling, doing a partial reinstall might be more time consuming than you want. One thing you could do instead, if you can at least boot the operating system, is to run something called the System File Checker, or SFC. What this does is, within Windows, it checks through all of your system files to make sure that they're healthy and that they're the versions that they should be, and it will automatically detect if there are any missing, and then it will restore them automatically for you. You do have to have a couple of things available, however. One of those things is something called a cache, and then another thing might be source files. Let's go ahead and take a look at cache first of all, and it looks like I'm going to go off track, but believe me, I'm going to get back there. Let's say that I've been playing something here. Let's say I've been playing solitaire, and I'm having a really good time playing and everything, and then it turns out that my boss says that, hey, you're not supposed to play solitaire while you're working. I say, well, I'm on my lunch break, so there. Well, nevertheless, I don't like seeing solitaire in the workplace, so I want you to delete that from the hard drive. Oh, all right. So you go up to the start, all programs, and you go to games, and then you right-click on solitaire, and you're just ready to hit delete when he says, wait a minute, I'm smarter than that. I know that that's not really going to delete it. That's just a shortcut. I want you to go to System, and then Windows, and then I'm going to have you go to System 32, and get to System32, and then now you're going to find sol.exe. Okay, so you go over here to sol, and I'm just typing in the first few letters, and it automatically takes me there. And then he says, or she says, now delete that immediately. Are you sure? Yes. So I hold down Shift to make sure it doesn't go to the recycle bin. I press delete, and I notice that it doesn't show me a recycle bin in this. Do you sure you want to delete this? Yes. Doggone it. Now I can't play solitaire anymore, so shucks. So if I were to go back up here and to go back to games, even though the shortcut is still there, when I click on solitaire, guess what happens? It comes back after all. What in the world happened there? Well, that's a happy day, isn't it? What happens is your operating system will automatically keep a current scan going of your system files, especially things that are located in that System32 directory, because there's a lot of critical things beside games in there, like DLLs and the like, that are important to the operation of Windows. And if it detects that one of those files has been deleted or corrupt, it will restore that file. So if I go back into here and refresh the screen, by the way, notice that it's already restored it. If I can get back to my directory here, SOL, I think it's in your, there it is. There's my solitaire file. It has been restored in just a blink of an eye, and it came back to me. Now, where is that information located? Well, it's located in a cache called the DLL cache. Look at, see it right there? Notice that it's blue, by the way. That's because it's compressed. That's because these are just duplicates of files that are already on the system, and then if one of them gets corrupt or missing, it'll restore one of these files. So if I go to sol, notice that we have, it's in here somewhere anyway, then we have the solitaire command. Oh, there it is. I knew I'd find it if I kept looking. So there's sol right there. That's why when I deleted it from System32, it just goes here to the DLL cache version and copies that back out to System32, so it's always available in there. The system file checker, which is where I started in this whole thing, will not only check to see if any of the files have been missing and that for some reason did not get properly copied out of the DLL cache, but it also checks the DLL cache files to make sure that they're up to date and that they are also present. If there's a file missing, then it will go to the source file on a, like your installation CD, and it will recover the file from there. And so then, even though you constantly have the system looking for changes to files, if you need to force it to do that, you can use SFC to force a check of those system files if you suspect something hinky is going on there. Yes, that's a technical term, hinky. Memorize that. It's not on the A+ exam, though. Okay, then what we can do is, when we run SFC, it will restore files from the cache if those files are still good, but if they're not, then it can restore the files from the source instead, like an installation CD or a network location where I've extracted all the installation files as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at how this might work then. If I'll just go to a command prompt, I can run SFC, and then if I do a question mark, you'll see that there's all different kinds of switches, so be aware of these. The one that you'll use most commonly in our kind of context, it'll be SFC /scan now, and it will scan all of my protected system files immediately. Now, I'm going to go ahead and run this, and it's going to give me a problem, and I'll show you something about that. It goes beyond the scope of A+ exam objectives, but it is a handy troubleshooting thing to know about. Notice that almost as soon as I start this thing, it says that I have to install the Windows XP Professional Service Pack 2 CD now. Oh, great. What in the world? I don't even know that I have a CD like that. I think it just updated to Service Pack 2, sometime when I did an automatic update or something. So now what do I have to do? Well, I hit cancel. Yeah, you sure you want to cancel? Yes. Cancel. You sure you want to cancel? Yes. Cancel. Are you sure you want to cancel? Yes. It does this countless times. I mean countless times. What I have to do is, and I'm not going to take you through it because it'll be a lot of trial and error, but eventually I have to move my mouse so fast and hit escape on the keyboard so fast, which is the same as hitting cancel, that I can totally kill this thing and then go back in here to fix it. All right, finally I was able to get past all the cancel messages. If you have to go through them all, it goes through like hundreds of these things. But if you're quick enough with the mouse and everything, you can hit cancel on the main program that's running and get away from it. But let's take a look at why that happened, why I got that error message. This is something that does frustrate people. Since it was installed using normal Windows XP, then the Service Pack 2 came out, so I upgraded Service Pack 2. But now, when I run SFC, it's looking for Service Pack 2 files, which are not on the installation CD because it's XP Service Pack, with no Service Pack. So now what I need to do is to point it to the right location. And here we're going to go back to a tool that we used earlier, regedit, or regedit32. Remember, they're both really the same thing. And what we need to do is to go to a registry location. This will be a good learning time to see how to use the registry editor. What I want to do is go to Software, Microsoft, and I'm under HK Local Machine. You can follow me down here as well, by the way. Software, Microsoft, and then Windows, okay? and then current version. Once we get into current version, we want to go to setup. This identifies where all of my source files are located. Notice that one of the items here it says is service pack source path. Once I find that item, I can just double click on this, and then I can point it to wherever my service pack files actually are. What you'll need to do is to get the administrative version of the service pack from Microsoft's website, and you'll download it. It's going to be quite a big file. And then there'll be instructions there. You can extract all of that to an administrative share somewhere. Then you can point it to that service pack source path. And also, anytime you make a change to HKey local machine, it's likely that you'll have to reboot the computer because these are going to be red when the system starts up. So if I really wanted to make that change, then I would do so there. Now, most manufacturers nowadays are also including a recovery CD and or a recovery partition, so that if your computer seems to get to a point where it's beyond troubleshooting, I mean, it is totally messed up, and you just can't get to the bottom of it and fix the problem, what you can do is to put the recovery CD into the drive, and then you boot from it, and it will usually allow you to restore your system to the same way that it was when it first came out of the box. These are going to be vendor specific, so if you're on a generic, white box machine that you created yourself, or you built yourself, you're not going to have this option unless you somehow create it yourself. Then what it often also does is it works with a hidden partition. That's the way my Dells are. I can boot from a recovery CD, and then it uses a hidden partition to help in the recovery process. Yours might be different. It might be everything is contained on the CD, including the operating system files. And then what you'll do is you boot from that CD. Usually it includes instructions with what to do, and then once you're through with the process, and it could take a good while to recover everything, then it's going to go ahead and restore your hard drive to the same state that it was when it first came out of the box. Now, because of that, you're going to lose certain things. If you'd installed applications after you bought that computer, you're going to lose those. If you had customized settings, wallpapers, all these kinds of things, you're going to lose all of that too. Because it's going to take it again back to the same state that it was when it came out of the box. And you're going to lose any of your data here also, especially if it was on the same partition that is currently being restored. If you created a separate partition and you have data there, it may retain that data. It just depends on the vendor. But it may only wipe out the data, or rather wipe out the partition where the operating system was originally installed and that it's recovering, and leave other partitions alone. Or it might wipe out all partitions. It just depends on what the manufacturer has configured for that recovery CD. Now finally, for users of Windows XP, we have something called System Restore. This is probably my favorite recovery utility that Microsoft's ever come out with. It's not as broad and sweeping as doing something like an ASR recovery or an ERD recovery, where we're practically doing almost a total reinstallation. Instead, what this does is it periodically takes a snapshot of my registry and monitored files. Well, when does it take a snapshot of this information? It does so every 24 hours if I leave my computer on constantly, and it also does so when I'm about to do something significant, such as install a new program or install an unsigned driver. At that point, it triggers System Restore and says, hey, wait a minute, this person might be doing something that would cause a problem later on, so we'll create a restore point automatically, transparently, and in the background. Usually you don't even know what's happening, and it does that right before it allows that driver or application installation. And then what you can also do is, if you suspect that you're about to do something risky on your own, you can manually create a restore point if you want also. What this also does is, if we're going to get into a problem and we have to restore a previous, what we call restore point, over our existing condition right now, then what it will do is preserve your data. It never backs up your data. Don't count on this to do that. That's not its main function. It's designed to get your operating system up and running again. Now, the System Restore is going to ignore your My Documents folder, so it doesn't back up any of the data in there, and it also ignores data file extensions like .doc, .xls, and other common data file extensions. That way, it prevents the situation from happening where you have accidentally restored data that's a week old on top of your current data and basically lost a week's worth of work. It doesn't give you that kind of a problem. Again, only relates to things that relate to the operating system itself. You got about between 1 and 3 weeks of available restore points that you can recover from. It depends on the amount of available hard drive space you have to store this information. And what also happens is it is reversible. Let me explain how this works. Here's a timeline. Here's where we have a system restore point created. And then time goes by, we installed a bad driver right here, for example. And that gives us some, wiggy problems. We don't really like what's going on. So today, T for today, we decided we want to go back to our previous point in time with this system restore point right here. What it does is, when I decide to go back to that previous point in time with that snapshot, it will then create an additional system restore point right here, just in case when I go back to this one, this also causes something to blow up, and it turns out that that was a bad idea. Well, instead, what I can do now is, once I see this is not giving me the result that I want, I can then go back to this system restore point that was automatically created right before I decided to go back to that other restore point. Now then, to demonstrate this, I've booted Windows XP here, and I'm going to click on the Start menu to go to Help and Support. Don't go to All Programs, it's not in there. Go to Help and Support, and then here it says Undo changes to your computer with System Restore. And then by clicking on that item, it brings open the System Restore item here. Then I can restore my computer to an earlier time. It's like rolling back the clock to the way that it was working, say, yesterday when everything was just fine. Okay, and then I can also create a restore point here if I want to. If I suspect that I'm about to get into trouble and install something kind of unstable or wiggy, then I could create a restore point and next finish through it. In my case, I'm going to assume that something has gone unstable or gone bad. I'm going to restore to an earlier point in time and click on Next. And I'm going to say, I want to go back to this system checkpoint that was created earlier today where I didn't have a problem just a few minutes ago. So then I'll go ahead and select that item. Otherwise, you can go through the calendar here and it will show you other restore points that might have been created at some point in the past. So I could go to, this date or some other date. Any dates that have a restore point available will be bolded for you. But I'll go ahead and click on Next, and then I'll go ahead and click on Next again, and you can kind of read that if you want to. But basically, it's not going to cause me to lose any of my work, any of my email, any of that kind of information. And then it's going to restart the computer. Now then offline here, I went ahead and allowed the system to reboot, which it'll have to do when it completes the system restore. And then I see this dialog box when it comes back up. I can choose another restore point if I have one available, or I can undo this restoration as necessary. So I'll just click OK here, and then it will boot into the normal Windows operating system and hopefully resolve any of the troubles that I've had. Even with the most gnarly problems that I've experienced since Windows XP came out, 9 times out of 10, this system restore will resolve the issue that I've run into. In this nugget, we took a look at various startup and recovery options. We started off by taking a look at various startup modes, most of those being some version of safe mode, although we do also have the antiquated method for Windows 95, which was that step-by-step method. Then we also took a look at the emergency repair disk, which you can create from within Windows 2000 to recover the operating system on the whole, and you can do the same type of thing using automated system recovery that's available for Windows XP operating systems. We also have the system file checker, which checks the integrity of the files, and we also know that we have various vendors that will include a recovery CD and or partition to recover a system back to its initial state. We also saw that System Restore can take us back to a previous point in time to give us excellent recoverability within Windows XP. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.